Study the load points with me. The sum was specific and modest, believable, worth taking, not worth suspecting. The provenance was anchored to true history. The channel was a phone call, unverifiable, undeniable. The secrecy was requested by me, which meant his silence toward Claire would feel loyal instead of guilty. And the destination, my ordinary checking account, was the trap's tripwire, because $52,000 landing in an account Grant did not administer was a problem for exactly one person in Ohio. A leak in a dam only its builder knew existed, and dam builders, when they hear dripping, do not send sympathy. They send concrete. If Grant was innocent, nothing would happen. A phantom pension would simply never materialize and die quietly the way phantoms do. If Grant was the author, then somewhere in the next week, my mailbox would produce paper, official, urgent, helpful paper, steering 52,000 imaginary dollars away from my checking and toward the managed account. And the day that paper arrived, the pattern would have a pen. Then we set the watch on the door itself. And this part I owe to my neighbor Bud Zawicki, 71, retired from 35 years at the Jeep plant and the most decorated deer hunter in 3 counties. A man whose garage contains, among much else, 4 trail cameras of the kind that photograph anything warm that moves in front of them and stamp it with the date and time. I told Bud the whole story over his workbench, because you cannot borrow a man's trail cameras for a job like this on false pretenses. And Bud listened, motionless to all of it. And when I finished, he was quiet for a moment and then said, in pure Toledo, "Ed, I've waved at that son of a gun at your barbecues." And then he took 2 cameras off the pegboard and said, "One for the box, one for the street, and I want it known that when this was over." Bud Zawicki declined a bottle of good bourbon and requested instead to be present at the end. And you will hear, when we get there, exactly how I honored that request, because Bud earned it. The cameras went up that evening, one in the lilac hedge with a clean view of my mailbox, one in Bud's front window covering the street, and Marisol, notebook dated, photographed the installation, and Vern drove my sealed written account of the entire trap, the phantom pension, the exact figure, the piano detail, every word, to the office of an attorney named Adele Fontaine, an estates and elder law lawyer with a reputation for cheerful ferocity, who read the summary, looked at me over her glasses and said, "Mr. Mercer, in 20 years of elder financial abuse cases, I have never had a client arrive with a notarized trap, a chain of custody, and his own corkboard." And I said, "Ma'am, my late wife framed evidence for our hallway. We are a particular kind of family." And Adele Fontaine wrote the date across the seal and put it in her safe and said, "Then let's go be particular at somebody." The letter took 5 days. 5 days, and on the morning of the 5th, Bud's hedge camera earned its place in this story's Hall of Fame. At 6:11 a.m., 40 minutes before sunrise and 3 hours before our carrier ever reaches Chestnut Street, a gray sedan I have parked behind at every family gathering for 11 years rolled to a stop at my curb with its headlights off. And the camera, patient as only machines in Vern are patient, took 9 photographs of my son-in-law, in a hooded sweatshirt, leaving his engine running, walking around the front of his car, opening the mailbox my wife painted, placing an envelope inside, closing the little door with, "And this detail I will carry to my grave with care, gently, the way you close a door in a sleeping house, and driving away." Time-stamped. Sequential. His face clear in 3 frames. My mailbox, June's mailbox, the holy site where 40 years of promises had arrived, and a man in a hood feeding it a lie by hand in the dark, and I sat at Bud's workbench at noon looking at those 9 photographs, and Bud looked with me, and after a while he said the only eulogy the moment needed. He didn't even use a stamp, "Ed. Cheap," he said, "everywhere you weren't looking. Even at the mailbox. Especially at the mailbox." The envelope itself was, "I will grant the craftsman this, his masterpiece. Lakeshore Tool and Die Legacy Benefits Administration." A letterhead built from nothing, because the real plan's records would have shown no such administrator. A barcode, wrong, naturally. I checked it standing at the box with gloves on like the old days. And inside, 2 pages of warm bureaucratic prose congratulating me on my located benefit of $52,000 and advising, for tax efficiency and estate protection, against deposit into an individual, recommending instead direct rollover into a qualified managed structure, and providing, helpfully, the routing details of the very account Grant administered and a form and a deadline. He had taken my phantom, dressed it, and mailed it back to me with a leash on it. The fish had not merely bitten the hook. The fish had swallowed the boat. I stood at my kitchen table with that letter in my gloved hands, the corkboard behind me, the photographs in a folder, 3 years of weather finally holding its author's fingerprints, and I said out loud, to the empty kitchen, to the diagram in the hallway, to a church secretary who had once promised a young inspector she would keep pulling the thread herself, "All right, Junie. Threads pulled. Now we plan the dinner." Before the dinner, the housekeeping, because a case is not the arrest. A case is everything you quietly nail down first so the arrest cannot wriggle. Those last 5 days ran like the closing week of an old task force, and Adele Fontaine ran the board. First, the money, because you protect the vault before you announce the robbery. The fake IRS deadline, with its push toward the $380,000 consolidation. I answered with silence, letting Grant believe the old man was simply slow, while Adele and I spent a morning at my actual bank and my actual brokerage, in person, with identification, resetting every credential, removing his recovery numbers, revoking a limited financial authorization I had signed in the fog of year 1 and barely remembered, and flagging both. Then the real IRS, and I want every viewer to hear this part because it took 11 minutes. 11 minutes on the official phone number printed on my prior year's actual tax transcript, not any number from any letter, to confirm what 3 years of terror had been built on. "Mr. Mercer," the woman said, "I show no notices, no balance due, and no flags on your account at all. Have a nice day. 3 years, friends." 3 years of my life, dissolved by one phone call I could have made on day 1, to a number I already possessed, and I sat in the car outside afterward and did not turn the key for a while, because there is a particular grief in learning the cage door was never locked. It was only painted, and I will return to that grief in the lessons, because it is the most useful thing I own now. Second, the record. Marisol, notebook current, took formal custody photographs of the corkboard, the letters, the filter logs, the camera cards, and sat with me while I wrote out the master affidavit, 31 pages, every date, every exhibit lettered. And when it was signed and notarized in Adele's office, Marisol looked at the stack and said, quietly, "Instructor, I want you to know that if you say the word, this walks into my office tomorrow as the cleanest referral of my career. And the United States Attorney will send you a fruit basket." And I said, "I know, Inspector. Hold that thought about 9 more days. The word may yet get said. It depends entirely on a conversation I have to have at a dinner table. And third, Claire, I have to account for this choice because it is the one I get challenged on every time. I did not show my daughter the file before the dinner. Vern argued for it to the last, and Vern was arguing for mercy, for sparing her the ambush. But I had watched for 3 years what curated information does, how the first mover in a war of stories owns the ground, and I knew that if Claire got the file privately, she would do the human thing, the loving thing, the fatal thing. She would go to her husband and give him a night to weep, explain, reframe, and by morning I would be facing not a cornered forger but a rehearsed couple. My daughter deserved the truth, all of it, but she deserved it the way a jury deserves it, with the exhibits on the table and the defendant's face in view, and no one, curating her feed ever again, not even me. So I called her and said, "Sweetheart, Sunday dinner at my place, I'm cooking. Tell Grant I've decided about the IRS thing and the consolidation, and I want to go over the paperwork with you both." And Claire, relieved, said, "Dad, that's wonderful, honestly, it'll be such a weight off everyone," and hung up happy. And I stood with the phone in my hand, feeling like precisely what I was, a man baiting a hook with his own daughter's relief. And I have made peace with it, mostly because the alternative was leaving her in the aquarium. And no, that phrase is not mine, it belongs to a boy in another family story. But we retired investigators trade our parables, and that one is true. Sunday, pot roast, June's recipe, because some occasions you cater from the archive. Claire brought rolls. Grant brought, and you may laugh, I did internally, a bottle of wine and a folder. His folder, the consolidation paperwork, flagged with signature tabs, the little arrows pointing where the old man should sign. And he set it by his plate the way a hunter leans his rifle by the door, and complimented the roast twice, and was funny and warm, and helped Claire with her chair. And I watched him across my table with the strangest feeling of the entire affair, which I will confess to you because these stories are worthless without the confessions. Some part of me, even then, even holding what I held, wanted him to be who he was pretending to be. That is the last power these men have over us, the mourning of the person they impersonated, and you do not fully cancel it. You just proceed over it. We proceeded over pie. I cleared the plates, poured the coffee, and said, "Grant, before we do your folder, I've got a little paperwork of my own, humor an old man," and I stood. And I opened the double doors to the dining room, where the corkboard stood waiting under the good chandelier. 41 letters, 16 index cards, the red yarn, the filter logs printed and pinned, the 9 photographs from Bud's camera enlarged along the bottom row, and the phantom pension letter, his masterpiece, framed dead center like the ribbon winner at a county fair. I have run a fair number of interrogations, and I have testified in rooms where verdicts landed, and I have never in my life heard a silence like the one that stood in my dining room for those first 10 seconds. Claire looked at the board the way you look at weather on the horizon, not yet understanding it is coming for you. And Grant looked at the bottom row, at 9 photographs of himself in a hood at a mailbox in the dark, and I watched 3 years of architecture leave a man's face in a single breath. And what remained was so much smaller than what had been there that Claire, seeing it, made a sound, before she understood anything, purely at the sight of her husband's face becoming the face of a stranger. I did not raise my voice. I gave the briefing exhibit by exhibit, the way I gave 1,000 of them, dates, documents, the check digits, the ghost facility, the 16 red threads from her father's dinner table worries to the letters that answered them, the 47 filters, the recovery numbers, the 6:11 a.m. timestamps, and my daughter, an ICU nurse, a woman trained to stand upright inside catastrophe, stood through all of it with her hand pressed flat against her sternum, and the only thing she said, the whole time, she said at the filter logs, very quietly to no one. That's why the bank never called him. I wondered for 2 years why the bank never called him. And then I came to the end of the board, and I turned to my son-in-law, and I did the thing I had rehearsed at Bud's workbench until Bud declared it, and I quote a Jeep man of 35 years, better than any deer he'd ever dropped. I took the phantom pension letter down from its frame, and I set it on the table in front of Grant, next to his folder with the little signature arrows. And I said, "Son, before anybody says one word about all this, I want you to do one tiny thing." And I put my finger on the row of tall and short bars along the bottom edge, and I said, "Read me that barcode, out loud, digit by digit, and then add it up for the table and tell us all whether it checks." He looked at the bars. He looked at me. and in his face I watched the last, worst discovery of his 3-year career arrive, the discovery every counterfeiter in every case I ever closed eventually made, always too late, always in a room like this. The discovery that the boring part was the whole part, that the machinery he faked had grammar, and the grammar had arithmetic, and the arithmetic had, this whole time, an audience of one. 30 years, Grant, I said gently, because gently was the plan, and by God, gently was harder than shouting. 30 years I got paid to check the math on frightened people's mail. You mailed a fraud investigator 41 frauds, and you never once checked whether the math was watching. His mouth moved. Nothing came out that mattered. And it was Claire, my daughter, June's daughter, who reached past him, picked up the letter, looked at the bars her father had been reading since before she was born, and said, in a voice I had last heard from her mother across a church office in 1981, flat and final as a postmark, "It doesn't check, does it, Grant? Nothing about you checks." What came out of Grant Keller over the following 2 hours, once the architecture was gone and there was nothing left to hold the wall up, I am going to report fairly and at length, the confession and the anatomy both, because I promised no cartoons, and because the anatomy is what the families watching actually need. If you came for the collapse, you have had it. Stay for the autopsy. The lesson's live there. It began, he said, and the file supports him with the startup. The failure he could not say out loud, the personal guarantee, the debt that renamed itself every 18 months at worst terms, $310,000 by the year of my bypass, serviced in secret out of a paycheck his wife believed was building their future. And into that pressure came my catastrophe, June, then my heart, and Grant did what he had done since he was 12 years old in a house full of his father's wreckage. He managed the disaster. And here is the first hard truth of the autopsy, the one I make myself say plainly. The first months were real. The chicken was real. The paperwork help was real. The man has a genuine gift for rescue. It is the truest thing in him, and the scheme grew out of the gift the way rot grows out of ripeness. Because the rescues felt, he said, and he said it staring at the table, like the only hours of his life that worked. Everywhere else I was drowning, Ed. In your kitchen. And when I got you squared away, when the real problems ran out, and this is the sentence I have thought about most, when the real problems ran out, I panicked. When the real problems ran out, I panicked. There is the whole disease in 7 words, friends. The rescuer who cannot survive the rescue's success. The first counterfeit letter, he swore, and the dates on my corkboard actually bear this out, predated any theft by months. It was not built to steal. It was built to be needed, one more fire for the department, and it worked so well. I was so grateful, so warm, so restored to him that he built another. The money came later, the way money always comes later, through the door habit had already propped. A management fee here, a skim of a reimbursement there. $46,000, the final accounting found, siphoned in threads across 3 years. Every thread paid in his mind toward the debt, toward the day he would be clear and could stop. Because they always believe they will stop. It is the license they issue themselves nightly. And then the debt's refinancing collapsed last spring, and the threads were no longer enough. And that is when the weather turned deliberate, the fake IRS, the 12-day fuse. The push for the whole vault in the house. I asked him, at one point the question Claire could not, whether the assisted living brochures, the curated evidence of my decline shown to his own wife, had been part of the plan from the start. And he said no, and then he stopped, and then he gave the most honest answer of the night, which was, "I don't know anymore, Ed. That's the part I can't explain to you." After a while I couldn't tell which fires I was setting, and which ones I just wasn't putting out. My father was a disaster, he said finally, and I built my whole self out of not being him, and I turned into something with better paperwork. Claire left the room during that stretch once and came back with her coat on, and did not put it on the chair. She wore it, seated, for the rest of the night. And if you want to know what the end of a marriage looks like, it is not shouting. It is a woman in her father's dining room wearing her coat indoors at 9 p.m., asking her husband forensic questions in her charting voice. It was Claire who asked about the 6:11 a.m. photographs how many times, and Grant said he honestly did not know, and Claire said, estimate, the way she must say it to interns about blood loss. And he said over 3 years, maybe 30, and my daughter looked at the mailbox photographs, her mother's mailbox, and said quietly, you watched us paint that box. You held the ladder. And Grant Keller put his face in his hands, and that particular exhibit needed no yarn. Now the verdict and the accounting, because you have stood with me this long and you get the full ledger, the federal question. You voted on it, daughter, federal, or fish, and you have seen what fishing bought. Here is how the last vote went. Marisol laid it out for the family in Adele's office that Wednesday with the clean brutality of the well-trained. The referral, she said, was righteous and ready, mail fraud, counterfeit postal markings, false federal agency communications, and conviction was, in her professional judgment, close to certain. And then my daughter, whom the statutes existed to protect, said the sentence that decided it. I have lost the marriage either way, Claire said. The question on the table is only whether I also lose the next 10 Christmases to a visiting room, and whether Dad spends his 80s as a witness for the prosecution instead of a grandfather. So I choose the version with teeth and without bars if a version with teeth exists. Show me the teeth. Adele Fontaine showed her the teeth, and I will list them, because families in this situation deserve the template. A full written confession, sworn, notarized, every letter, every date, every dollar, executed in Adele's office and lodged in her safe beside my trap statement and the camera cards. Restitution of the $46,000, secured against Grant's vehicle and his retirement account, on a schedule with no mercy in it. Every access revoked, every password, every proxy, confirmed in writing by each institution. The consolidation folder with its little signature arrows, shredded in front of me by its author, at my request, in my kitchen. And yes, that request was petty, and no, I do not regret it. A man is allowed one petty thing per betrayal, and that was mine. And the tooth that matters most, the one I insisted on and Marisol constructed. The entire file, affidavit, exhibits, photographs, confession, sits copied in a sealed package in Inspector Viga's custody, and the terms which Grant signed are these. If one more counterfeit communication of any kind aimed at any person ever traces to Grant Keller, the seal comes off and the package walks into the United States Attorney's office the same afternoon, with 3 years of interest. He does not get probation from a judge. He gets it from me, and my parole board is a cork board, and it meets in my dining room forever. Vern called it the finest sentence never handed down in the Northern District of Ohio. Bud called it something better, but Bud's version is not for broadcast, and the last accounting of that Wednesday was between Grant and me alone, on Adele's 14th floor landing, waiting for the elevator, when he finally asked me the question the whole affair had been circling. Why dinner, Ed? You had the file. You could have just had them come for me. Why the pot roast? Why the board? Why make me read the numbers out loud? And I gave him the true answer, and I give it to you now, because it is as close to a philosophy as this old inspector owns. Because arrests punish, son, I said, but they don't teach, and you are going to be in my family's orbit at some distance for the rest of my life, and I needed you taught. You spent 3 years making the people who trusted you feel stupid at their own kitchen tables. So the lesson had to happen at a kitchen table, and the lesson is this. The boring parts of the world are load-bearing, the dull marks, the check digits, the filed letters, the people you wave at over barbecues. You built your whole scheme on the certainty that nobody was watching the boring parts, and son, the boring parts are all anybody like me has ever watched. the elevator came. He held the door. Old habit, the fire department to the last, and I stepped in, and we rode down without another word, which was, I believe, the first fully honest conversation we ever had. Now the year after, honestly rendered, the repair and the residue both, because these stories owe their audiences the unglamorous part or they owe them nothing. Claire filed for separation that same month and moved, for a season, into her old bedroom down the hall from mine. 39 years old, an ICU nurse sleeping under a ceiling still faintly marked with the glow stars her mother put up in 1993. And I will tell you that having her home, under those circumstances, was a grief and a gift so tangled together that I gave up sorting them and just cooked for her. We did not talk about Grant most nights. We talked about her patients, and my corkboard came down that first week. She asked me to take it down. I understood, and the dining room went back to being a dining room, though the file lives on in Adele's safe and Marisol's seal, and the trail cameras went back to Bud's pegboard with full honors. What Claire and I did talk about, eventually in the slow, sideways manner of careful people, was the fog years, and I owe you the hardest exchange of them because it is the one the adult children watching need. She asked me, one February night over decaf, why I never once called her when the letters came. 3 years, Dad, she said. 41 disasters, and you called him every time and me never. Did you think I couldn't handle it? And I told her the truth I had excavated by then with some professional help, which is that it was never doubt of her, it was vanity of me. A father wants to arrive at his daughter's door as the lighthouse, never as the wreck, I said, and Grant understood that about me before I understood it about myself, and he built the whole scheme inside my vanity, the way a shipworm builds inside a hull. The lesson, Claire, and I made her look at me for this part, the lesson is that the people who love you cannot verify what you hide to look strong for them. Weakness shown early is information. Weakness hidden is inventory, and somebody will eventually count it and sell it. She cried a little, my unflappable girl, and then she said in her mother's exact cadence, well, new rule in this family. We arrive as wrecks. And we have, both of us since, and I commend the rule to every proud family watching. Arrive as wrecks. It is cheaper. Grant pays on schedule every month and works and lives across town and sees a therapist whose specialty, Claire tells me, is exactly the pattern I diagnosed at the dinner table, the rescuer who manufactures the need. Whether the marriage survives is not settled as I record this. They sit in a counselor's office twice a month, and I have declined, firmly, every invitation from every relative to hold an opinion about it, because I have learned where opinions travel in a family and what they compound into. What I hold instead is the seal, and the schedule, and a civil, careful peace with a man who, I will report one small strange thing, shovels my walk when it snows early before I wake and does not mention it. And the first time I caught the shoveled walk from my window, I stood there a long moment, deciding what it was, penance or reflex or courtship of my forgiveness. And then I decided it did not require classification, and put it in the file under boring parts, load. And the mail came back. I want to tell this properly because it is the actual ending. Everything after it is just lessons. With the filters torn out and the accounts reclaimed, my mailbox, June's mailbox, began over weeks to fill again with the ordinary truth of a solvent man's life. Statements that reconciled, a county that wanted nothing, an insurer renewing without drama, and I stood at that box some mornings reading an ordinary bank statement like it was correspondence from a liberated country, which it was. But the part I need you to hear is what Claire did. My daughter, the month she moved back in, bought a box of note cards and started a habit, and she keeps it still from her own apartment now, of mailing me 1 card a week, real mail, a stamp, 3 or 4 lines in handwriting that is her mother's handwriting continued by other means. Saw a cardinal on the unit windowsill, thought of you, roast on Sunday, love C. The first one arrived on a Tuesday and I stood at the box with it. And I am not ashamed to tell you what I did, because June would have demanded a full report. I read it twice, and I checked the barcode out of love, out of habit, out of ceremony, and it summed clean, of course it did. And I said out loud to the box her mother painted, to the street, to the whole restored republic of the ordinary, it checks. And every Tuesday since, some part of my week is a walk to that box to verify, in both senses, both sacred senses, that a promise with a stamp on it still travels and still counts and still checks. Bud got his request, by the way, and I promised you I would tell it. Bud Zawicki's condition for the loan of his cameras was to be present at the end, and the end, as Bud defined it, was not the dinner. Bud has manners. The end was the morning, a week after everything settled, when I took down the mailbox, June's mailbox, dented now with 3 years of history I did not want to look at daily, and Bud and I, 2 old men and a level and a bag of quickset concrete, planted a new post and mounted a new box, and painted it badly, the same blue June chose in 1986. And when it was done, Bud straightened up, surveyed our work, and delivered the benediction he had been fresh box, clean math, and a camera in my window forever because I'm nosy now. Ed, you've ruined me. Any gray sedan slows down on this street again, I'll have it framed by lunch. If you have a Bud on your street, and most streets have one, waving distance from your whole life, I want you to consider tonight that your neighborhood already contains a surveillance network of the retired and the observant that no technology company can match, and it runs on coffee and being asked. Now let me pay my debts to the comments because I keep my books, and then I am going to teach you the checks, all of them, the full seminar, because that is the actual reason I sat down in front of this microphone, and everything else was just the tuition. First debt. Early on, I asked you to write down the exact moment you believe you would have caught it, and I promised you my own answer, the one that keeps me up some nights. Here it is, itemized, because I audited myself the way I would audit anyone. Across 3 years there were, by my count, 9 separate moments when the evidence in my own hands was sufficient for the man I used to be. The letter that misspelled the county's name. The collection notice that arrived on a Sunday, and mail does not come on Sunday, friends. It was in the box Monday morning but dated received Sunday in my own log, and I logged it and did not see it. The fraud alert with a callback number 1 digit different from my bank's real number printed on the card in my own wallet, 8 inches from the letter. 9 tripwires, and I stepped over everyone, and here is the finding of the audit, and I want it framed in every comment section on this channel. I was not fooled because I was old, and I was not fooled because I was foolish. I was fooled because I was flooded. Fear does not defeat expertise by outsmarting it. Fear defeats expertise by exhausting it. 41 emergencies is not a puzzle, it is a siege, and the purpose of a siege is never to breach the wall. It is to make the man on the wall too tired to look down at the arithmetic he has known his whole life. So when you graded yourself in the comments, and most of you graded yourselves early catchers, I believed you about the first letter. Now tell me honestly about the 31st, arriving in month 26 on a morning when you are tired and grieving, and the last 40 solutions all came from the same warm voice. The scheme that gets you will not beat your mind. It will book your mind solid and then deal with your heart directly. Guard accordingly. Second debt, the vote, daughter, federal or fish, and the accounting of my override. Fishing bought the photographs, and the photographs bought everything. The confession, the restitution, the seal, my daughter's freedom to choose teeth without bars. And I stand by the override, but I owe you the cost line too, because command decisions always have one. The cost was 11 more days of my daughter married to a lie with my knowledge, 11 days of her chattering happily to me on the phone about the weight coming off everyone, while I held the file and said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart." I do not fully have absolution for those 11 days, and I have stopped applying for it. If you are ever the one holding the file, know the price going in. Evidence first, verdicts later is the right procedure, and the right procedure will cost you something no procedure can reimburse. Pay it anyway. The alternative rates are worse. And now, the seminar. The Mercer checks, June's rules. 30 years of the inspection service boiled down to what fits on a card by the telephone. And I want you to hear these not as trivia but as armor. And I want you to teach them to somebody older than you within the week, at a kitchen table, with the television off. Check 1, the callback rule, and if you keep only one, keep this. Never, ever respond to an alarming communication using any contact information printed on the alarming communication. Not the phone number, not the website, not the envelope, not the helpful QR square. The letter chooses what it says. It also chooses where it sends you, and a counterfeit letter is a counterfeit door, opening into the forger's own hallway. You call your bank at the number on the back of the card that has lived in your wallet for years. You call the IRS at the number on last year's transcript. You walk into the branch. 11 minutes, friends. 11 minutes on a number I already owned dissolved 3 years of siege. The real institution is always reachable by the road you already knew. The counterfeit lives only at the address it hands you. Check 2, the urgency test. Real institutional trouble moves like an institution, slowly in duplicate, with appeal periods measured in months. Deadlines of days, threats of hours act before the window closes. These are not the grammar of government or banking. They are the grammar of theater because urgency exists to outrun your verification. And the moment a letter tells you there is no time to check, it has told you the single most important fact about itself, which is that it cannot survive checking. Check 3, the secrecy test, urgency's twin. Any communication, any advisor, any process that asks you not to discuss it with family, with your own lawyer, with the branch teller has confessed. Legitimate business survives witnesses. Fraud is allergic to the second opinion the way counterfeits are allergic to arithmetic, and the request for quiet is the loudest thing a scheme ever says. Check 4, the specimen drawer. This one is pure inspection service and it costs nothing. Keep one folder, a real folder paper of known genuine letters, one from your actual bank, your actual insurer, your actual county, verified once by calling the number you already had. That folder is your reference library. When a new letter arrives shouting, you do not need my 30 years, you need side by side. Hold the newcomer against the specimen. The logo will match, forgers are good at logos, look at everything else. The paper's weight, the fold, the window. The little dull machine markings along the bottom. Perfect where you look, cheap where you don't, so look where you don't. Differences between the shouting letter and the quiet specimen are the whole conversation. Check 5, the pattern ledger, and this is June's, and it is the deepest one. Write your days down. Who called, what arrived, what worried you, and when. Because no single counterfeit announces itself, but patterns cannot help it, whether that answers your private conversation. Emergencies that cluster around one helper's availability. Disasters that only ever have one witness and one solution. A simple dated log kept faithfully is a machine for making the invisible rhythm visible, and it is the one investigative tool that has featured in every single one of these stories I have ever heard or lived. The ledger, the log, the diary, the file, because the counterfeit's one unfixable flaw in mail, in sermons, in sons-in-law, is that it must keep arriving, and anything that keeps arriving keeps a schedule, and schedules, friends, some. Like barcodes. Run the math. There are 2 loose threads I owe you before the ending, because I saw both of them in the comments the last time I told a story with this shape. and an inspector who leaves threads deserves the comments he gets. The first is the tax resolution specialist, the confident voice on my speakerphone who confirmed the danger and praised my luck in having such a son-in-law. You want to know who he was, and the answer, when Marisol pulled the thread, turned out to be the cheapest trick in the whole affair and the most instructive. The specialist's number was an internet phone line, a voice-over IP account, registered, Marisol found in about 9 minutes, to an email address one letter removed from Grant's own, and the voice was Grant, running a consumer voice-changing application and a script, sitting in his parked car 2 blocks from my house so the call would not share his home network, playing both halves of my rescue like a man doing a puppet show with each hand. When it came out at the dinner table, Claire asked him only one question about it, which was whether he had written the specialist's compliments about himself, and Grant said yes, and my daughter laughed once, a terrible bark of a laugh, and said, well, at least somebody in this marriage was getting praised, and friends, I have heard cross-examinations that drew less blood. The lesson of the specialist is the lesson of the age, and I will put it plainly for everyone my vintage. A voice is no longer a person. A confident stranger endorsing the plan by phone is a graphic, the audio equivalent of a letterhead, and it verifies exactly nothing. The road you already knew. Always only the road you already knew. The second thread is heavier, and I have saved it deliberately because it belongs near the end. You will remember the 11 letters, the ones June dictated in her last week and made me mail from the blue box on Sycamore, one to each of the... What I did not tell you, because I had honestly not counted the recipients in years, is that one of the 11 was addressed to Grant. I learned this on a Snowdon morning last winter, when the walk had been shoveled again before dawn, and this time the shoveler had not driven away. Grant was sitting in his car at the curb, and when I opened the door he came up the path holding, with 2 hands, the way you hold something that outranks you, an envelope, soft with handling, and he said, Ed, I've been coming here trying to give you this for a month and losing my nerve. And I think you need to see it because I've had it the whole time, and that's part of my sentence too. It was June's hand on the envelope. 4 years he had kept it. And standing in my doorway in the cold, at his insistence, I read my wife's last letter to her son-in-law, and with Claire's permission and his, I am going to give you the 2 sentences from it that matter, because they are the reason this section exists. After the love, and there was love in it, real love, June wrote this. Grant, honey, you have the strongest need to be needed of any man I ever met, and I say this while I still can. Being needed and being good are not the same thing, and when Edwin's fires run out, and they will, promise me you won't light any just to keep your helmet on. She saw it. 4 years ahead, 10 weeks from her own death, dictating to me, and I never registered the sentence I was writing. My hand transcribed a prophecy addressed to the exact catastrophe, and I mailed it myself from the box on Sycamore. Grant stood on my doorstep with the snow coming down and said, I read it the week after the funeral, Ed, and I put it in a drawer. And every single time I drove to your mailbox at 6 in the morning, I knew that letter was in my house, knowing what I was. She wrote me the check, and I never once ran the math. And I stood there holding my wife's handwriting, and I will tell you what I felt, and it was not fresh rage. We were past rage by then. It was awe, the particular awe her diagram in the hallway had been teaching me for 40 years. Paper is testimony, she had testified. The letter had traveled, it had counted, it had been, like every real letter, a promise with a stamp on it, and the promise had been broken by its recipient. And now, 4 years late, it had completed delivery anyway at my door in the snow, in the hands of the man it had tried to save. I made him coffee. It seemed like what she was asking. We drank it mostly in silence at the kitchen table, the site of every crime and every verdict in this story. And when he left, I filed June's letter where it belonged, in the specimen drawer, the folder of known genuine articles, the reference library against which all arriving things are checked, because, friends, that is exactly what it is. The realest piece of mail I ever handled. Everything else gets held up against it. If this story has earned it from you, this is the moment I will ask, the only time tonight. Subscribe and put the word specimen in the comments if you intend to start the drawer, because what comes next is the part of my life these videos exist to fund and to feed, and I would like you there for it. Mail Mondays started the following spring, in the community room of the Birchwood Senior Center, third Monday of every month, coffee urn, folding chairs, and a retired postal inspector with a corkboard. And yes, it is the same corkboard. It came back down from the attic for a better purpose. And it now displays, instead of my 41 letters, a rotating museum of counterfeits my students bring me. Because they bring them now, that is the whole victory. They bring them in purses and coat pockets, unopened, unanswered, uncalled, and we examine them together under the document camera Marisol's office donated, and the room learns to look where the letter is cheap. I open every session the same way. I hold up 2 envelopes, one real, one forged, and I tell the room one of these is lying, and neither of them is going to confess. And then I teach the checks, the callback rule, the urgency test, the secrecy test, the specimen drawer, the pattern ledger. And around the second hour, somebody always goes quiet in the particular way and stays after the folding chairs are stacked, holding a letter or just holding a suspicion, and that after-class conversation, friends. That is the actual work. The seminar is bait. The staying after is the catch. I will give you one from this winter with her blessing. A widow named Dorothea, 81, sharp as a hatpin, stayed after with nothing in her hands and said, "Inspector, I don't have a letter, I have a feeling, and I taught you people never to apologize for the feeling, so." Her grandson, she said, or a voice like him, had called twice from trouble in another state, and paper had followed, official, urgent paper about bond and fees, and something, she said, was off in the voice, close but off, like a photograph of a photograph. We ran the checks together at the folding table. The callback rule found her actual grandson at his actual number, at work, in no trouble whatsoever. The paper failed 3 of the 5 tests in as many minutes, and the barcode, Dorothea insisted on the barcode. She had heard about the barcode, did not some. $14,000, staged in an envelope in her hall drawer for a courier who was due Thursday, went back into her account Friday morning, and Marisol's office took the rest of it from there, and it went where such files deserve to go. Dorothea comes to every session now and sits in the front row and heckles me gently when I fumble the document camera. And last month she brought her bridge club, all 4 tables of it. And as they filed in, she announced to the room, in the voice of an 81-year-old who has faced down a courier scheme and a hip replacement in the same year, "Ladies, pay attention. This man is going to teach you arithmetic that bites. Finest introduction of my career." I opened with the check digit in her honor, and one morning this past fall, the circle closed all the way in a lecture hall in Cleveland, when Inspector Marisol Vega, who now teaches the fraud documents block she once sat through, called her old instructor out of retirement for a guest hour. The case study on the screen was anonymized. A retired subject matter expert, systematically defrauded through counterfeit correspondence by a trusted family member, and I stood at the front of that room, 13 years after I last stood in one, and watched 40 young inspectors work my own file without knowing whose it was, watched them find the check digits, the ghost facility, the 72-hour answering pattern, watched one trainee in the 3rd row raise her hand and say, "The part I can't get past is the victim's background. How does this happen to someone who knows everything on this slide?" And Marisol looked at me one flicker and said, Inspector Mercer, would you take that one?" And I told them. I told them the victim was flooded, not fooled. I told them about sieges and arithmetic, about vanity and lighthouses and wrecks, about how expertise is a wall and grief is a ladder. And the room got very quiet, the way rooms do when they realize the case study is standing at the lectern. And at the end, a young man stayed after, the way a young woman named Vega once stayed after, and asked me to teach him the check-digit trick. And I did at the corner of the stage, digit by digit. And walking to my truck across that parking lot afterward I want the record to show, entirely unable to see the lot clearly, and it was not my eyes. My eyes are fine. My eyes, as this entire story establishes, are the one thing about me that never once stopped working. So here is where it all stands, on the evening I am recording this. The house on Chestnut Street is mine, deed untroubled, roof replaced, by a contractor I found myself, whose estimate I verified myself. An ordinary transaction that felt, after everything, like an act of athletics. The retirement account sits where it always sat, whole, boring, load-bearing. Claire has her own apartment 10 minutes away and a marriage in honest, uncertain repair, and a standing Sunday chair at my table, and a note card habit that has put, at last count, 61 pieces of real mail through her mother's blue box, every one of which checked. Vern comes Thursdays and loses at cribbage, and disputes the arithmetic, which from a document man is pure comedy. And last Thursday he arrived with a gift, wrapped in craft paper and string like something out of 1962. And inside was a brass magnifying loupe, engraved around the rim, and the engraving reads, "Look where it's boring," and it sits now on the kitchen windowsill, aimed at the mailbox, which Vern insists is a coincidence of feng shui, and I insist is the finest piece of installation art in Toledo. Bud watches the street, deputized for life. Marisol holds the seal, which has never needed breaking, and Grant Keller pays on schedule, shovels in the dark, and carries in some drawer of himself a letter from a woman who saw him whole and loved him anyway and asked him to be good. And whether he finally becomes the man that letter was mailed to is the one file in this whole affair that remains, honestly, open. I hope it closes well. June invested in it. If there is one thing I want you to take from tonight, out of all the checks and all the yarn, it is this. The counterfeit in your life, whatever envelope it arrives in, a letter, a sermon, a savior, a voice on a phone, is perfect exactly where you look and cheap exactly where you don't. And so the whole discipline of protecting yourself and everyone you love comes down to 4 words my wife could have told you in 1975 for free. Look where it's boring. The bar. The pattern, not the emergency. The filter rules, not the friendly interface. The man's arithmetic, not the man's warmth. Fear will always grab your eyes and drag them to the headline. Train your eyes every time to finish at the bottom of the page where the dull marks live, because the dull marks are where the truth and the lie are forced to differ, and everything above them is just performance. And the second thing, the June thing. Keep paper. Write your days, file your letters, keep the specimen drawer, mail the real card to the real person with the real stamp. Not because paper is old, but because paper is testimony, a promise that agrees in advance to be held to, and a life that keeps testimony is a life that cannot be quietly rewritten by whoever controls the screens and the filters and the phone lines around it. They can counterfeit almost everything now: friends, voices, letters, urgency, even love's daily. What they cannot counterfeit is your own dated handwriting about your own days, sitting in a drawer, patient as Vern, waiting to some. Days lie. Fear lies faster. Paper doesn't. If this story reached you, tell me in the comments. Go back to the guess you made at the beginning, and to the moment you swore you would have caught it, and grade yourself honestly. And if the word climate found you earlier, Or the word specimen is going on a folder in your house this week. Say so, because every word in that comment section is a porch light for the next family reading in the dark. If someone you love gets mail that frightens them and someone always fixes it, send them this story gently, the way you would hand them a magnifying glass, not a verdict. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe so you do not miss what I have to share next. Thank you for staying with me until the end, all the way to the bottom of the page where the dull marks live. Trust the people you love. Verify the paper anyway. Call the number you already had. And if a letter ever arrives that makes your chest go tight at 2 in the morning, do what an old inspector finally did. Put your hand flat on the table, breathe once, and check the arithmetic. Because fear can counterfeit nearly anything in this world. But it has never once, in the entire history of the mail, gotten the math right. A final note before you go. Certain names, locations, and identifying details in this story have been altered to protect the privacy of everyone involved. If you or someone you know may be the target of mail fraud, counterfeit official correspondence, or financial exploitation, particularly involving an elderly family member, please contact the United States Postal Inspection Service, your local Adult Protective Services agency, or a qualified attorney directly. Report it even if it feels small and even if it feels shameful. It is neither. What she told me over the next 3 hours in that glass room, the folder in January, the calm administrative stranger wearing her husband's face, the itemized threat, the phone that reported her, the 5 months of an archivist's escape, cash in film canisters, the bag in the storage unit, the kayak seminar she gave herself from library books, checked out, God bless her, from 3 different counties, the cold water arithmetic, the swim in a wetsuit under a moonless sky from the tipped kayak to the dark shore while her old life floated away behind her. I have already threaded through this story where it belongs, and I will not make her live it twice. But 2 things from that tower I will set down exactly, because they are the load-bearing beams of everything after the first, she said, staring out at the lake. Dad, I did the math 100 times and it always came out the same. Anyone I told became someone he could burn. My name is all over his files. He built it that way for years. I'm not the witness against him. I'm the defendant he keeps in a drawer. If I ran to you alive, I made you a target and me a fugitive wife nobody believes. If I died, and she said it that flatly, if I died, I was out of the drawer. The dead can't be framed, Dad. I didn't run from him. I ran from the version of me he had spent 6 years building in the... I asked her in that first hour the question the comment section has been shouting since the cold open. Why the 9 days? Why let me stand at the grave believing? And she took a while with it, looking at the lake, and gave me the first version of the answer, the field version. The full one came later on a therapist's carpet, and you will hear it in its place. She said, I took the photograph at 17 past 10, while the urn went down, and I told myself it was insurance, proof of life to send the day it was safe. And then every day I looked at it, and every day you were in it, your coat, your head, and every day I ran the same 2 costs against each other, your grief if I stayed dead, your danger if I didn't, and Dad, your grief kept losing. 8 straight days your grief lost the vote, because grief doesn't kill you and he might. That's just the arithmetic, and I did the arithmetic like her. She nodded at the ring, cold, careful, twice. And on the 9th morning I woke up in Mom's cottage in Mom's quilt, and I heard her, actually heard her, the librarian voice, the returns desk voice, and she said, Hannah Rose, your father has spent 40 years finding the truth in corners nobody else checks. Put it in a corner. So I put it in the corner, 16 enlargements down, and I sent it. And then I sat in that cottage for 3 days shaking, waiting to find out whether I had saved you or killed us both. And I told my daughter what I will tell all of you, that her mother's advice was, as usual, professionally sound, and that the 9 days are not on her account. They are on his. Every cost of that whole season goes on exactly one account, and the account is settled now, and we do not carry his debts for him, not even the grief. Especially not the grief. And the second thing, and this is where my daughter turned and looked at me with her mother's whole face on, is that dying only got me out, she said. It doesn't get me back. I've been sitting up in this tower for 3 weeks working that problem, and it needs something I don't have. It needs somebody who can prove what he is without me saying a word, so that when I walk back into the world, I walk in as the witness and not the drawer. And I stood in that glass cab, and I felt 40 years of a certain basement shift its weight under me like a ship's ballast. And I said, "Sweetheart, I need to tell you about a Chamber of Commerce luncheon in 2009. And my daughter, who knows what my pauses mean the way Fran knows, went very still and said, and I said, "I don't know yet, but nobody remembers the photographer, Hannah, and the photographer is about to go remember everyone." Monday, Fran DeLuca came to my kitchen with her pencil, as summoned, and I told my editor everything, and I want to record her reaction in full because it is the finest 90 seconds of listening I have ever witnessed. She did not interrupt. She did not gasp. She took notes in the shorthand no one under 70 can read anymore, and when I finished, Fran DeLuca, 81 years old, set down the pencil, removed her glasses, and said in order the following. 1. Thank God. 2. You should have come to me the first night, you sentimental mule. I have buried 2 husbands and a governor's career. I know how to keep a secret with a candle lit under it. 3. And here she put the glasses back on, which with Fran means the meeting has started. 3. Corbin, you understand what you're actually describing. You're describing the biggest story this paper will ever run, and we are not going to run it, not one word, until the exact morning it protects her. And then we are going to run all of it, and it is going to be edited properly. So get me coffee and get me the timeline, because the first thing wrong with your investigation is that it doesn't have one. She was right, it didn't, and by that evening it did. Fran's timeline in shorthand and blue pencil, taped inside my darkroom door next to the burner's number. And the plan that came off that timeline had 3 fronts, and I will give them to you the way Fran gave them to me because nobody has ever briefed better. Front 1, the man. Prove what Vaughn Ellison is from the outside, independent of Hannah, paper he cannot burn and witnesses he cannot frame. That's you and the basement. Front 2, the girl. Her legal position, the search and rescue costs, the coming back to life of it, all of it needs a lawyer before it needs a headline, and I have one, Grace Yun. She was my libel counsel for 20 years. She is discreet as a bank vault and twice as hard to open. Front 3, the clock. His petition, the insurance, and Fran tapped the folder tab I described, the cottage. The moment any court declares that girl dead, every one of these gets teeth. So we work all 3 fronts at once. We tell nobody who doesn't hold a front, and Corbin, she looked at me over the glasses, when the day comes, and it will come, that this breaks in public, it breaks on our terms, at our moment, in our frame. You taught me that word, she said, gathering her coat. Frame. The picture is decided by where you stand when you take it. Well, we are going to spend the next 2 months deciding where everybody stands. The basement took a... I want you to see the work honestly, because the montage version these stories usually offer, the flipping pages, the eureka, insults the actual labor, and the labor is the sermon. 200,000 negatives do not search themselves, and a man looking for one stranger's face across 39 years needs a filter, and my filter was Fran's timeline logic. Vaughn Ellison arrived in Larkin County 12 years ago, but men like Vaughn are not born on arrival. They are born on departure from somewhere, from something. And if his path had ever once crossed this region before his official birth here, the crossing would be commercial, financial, a conference, an expo, a chamber event, the watering holes of his species. And those I had shot, all of them, every year, for every year that mattered. Because the courier covered anything with a ribbon, and I was the courier. Binders 2005 through 2013. Business section. Event coverage. Contact sheets first. Loop on the light table. Frame by frame, night by night. The county's entire commercial past parading under the glass. And I will confess to you the strange devotional quality those nights took on. Faces long dead smiling up at me. Storefronts long closed with their awnings bright. My own younger shadow occasionally caught in a window. A man reviewing his life's work at last and finding it was not filler after all. It was a net, knotted one unregarded frame at a time for 40 years, and now drawn tight. And the net held more than the quarry. I had not planned for this part. No one warns you about this part. Search 4 decades of a small county's negatives and you will keep meeting your own family in the backgrounds, uninvited, unposed, alive. Hannah at 11, blurred at the edge of a fair crowd in 1999. Mid-laugh, holding a candy apple I have no memory of buying. Nora in the second row of a 2003 council meeting I was shooting for the land dispute, chin on her hand, plainly grading the proceedings. The two of them together, small in the corner of a 2008 parade frame, sharing an umbrella, heads tipped toward each other in some conversation 40 feet outside my assignment. And I sat under the basement bulb at 1 in the morning with that contact sheet, and understood something about my trade I had somehow never once developed in 40 years of practicing it. I thought I had spent my career photographing the county, and missing, everyone said so, gently, teasing half my own family's life to do it. The negative said otherwise. The negative said I had been photographing my family the entire time, in the margins, in the crowds, in the unregarded corners of 9,000 assignments, an accidental archive of everything I loved conducted at the edge of everything I was paid to see. Nobody remembers the photographer, friends. But the photographer, it turns out, remembers everyone, even when he doesn't know he's doing it, especially then. And on the hard nights of that hard winter, I would finish the evening's hunt for a thief and then spend one more hour, just one, printing candy apples and umbrellas. And if you want to know what kept me sane through the whole affair, it was not the case. It was the corners. On the 9th night, Binder 2009B, the Tri-County Financial Services Expo, Ramada Ballroom. 40 frames I had no memory of taking, grip and grins, panel tables, and there. Contact sheet 4, frame 22, background left of a banner, holding a coffee, listening to a man in a bolo tie. 11 years younger, fuller in the face, mustached, but with the stance, friends, the stance. Photographers know people by stance before face. The weight always on the trip. The chin's habitual 8 degrees of tilt that reads as attentive in every light. Vaughn Ellison. In my county, 3 years before Vaughn Ellison existed. I printed the frame at every size the paper allowed, and then I went in, Hannah's Law. Everything is always in there. 16 times up on the chest, on the conference lanyard, on the little printed badge that every man at every expo wears and no man ever imagines is testimony. And the grain bloomed and steadied and gave up its 2 lines, and the badge did not say Vaughn Ellison. The badge said D. Vanek, and below it, in smaller type that took the 20 times enlargement and 2 hours of dodging to pull clean, Lakeland Fidelity Group, Columbus, Ohio. Grace Yun had the rest inside 4 days, because once a false man has a true name, he is simply a filing to be requested. Dean R. Vanek, formerly of Columbus, Ohio, barred from the securities industry by state regulators in 2011. Permanently, 4, and I will quote the public order's lovely gray language, unauthorized transactions and misappropriation of client funds in accounts of elderly investors. Restitution ordered, restitution, Grace noted dryly, largely unpaid, on account of Mr. Vanek's whereabouts becoming unknown in the spring of 2012. The spring of 2012. The season, a fresh-started widower named Vaughn Ellison from Chicago, he said, rented modestly in Larkin Falls and joined the Rotary. There had never been a Chicago. There had never been a young late wife. Grace could locate no record of either. There was only Columbus, an order, an unpaid restitution, a chosen exit, and a small trusting town 4 hours east that did not read Ohio enforcement bulletins, would never in 100 years think to, and had a robotics team. He had not built a life here. He had built a blind, the kind hunters build, patient, seasonal, brush by brush, and my daughter, and half the retirees of Main Street were what the blind was for. I drove the print and the order up the fire road that Friday and laid them on the map table of the glass cab, and my daughter, the archivist, read the enforcement order twice, flat and professional, and then looked for a long time at the 2009 frame, at the mustached stranger with her husband's stance, and what she finally said, I have thought about ever since, because it is the epitaph for every counterfeit man in every one of these stories. She said, 6 years, Dad. 6 years I lived with him and I have never once seen this person. And you got him in a 400th of a second, by accident, from across a ballroom because he didn't know the furniture had film in it. And she put her mother's ring hand flat on the print, the way you steady a thing that might blow away, and said, all right. Now I can come home, tell me where I stand. And I said the sentence Fran had sent me up the mountain to say. You stand at the watching place, sweetheart. At the unveiling. And this time everybody looks up. Now the machinery of the last 6 weeks, each front in turn, because a resurrection, it turns out, is mostly paperwork. And the paperwork is where Fran and Grace earned statues. Front to first, the girl, because her position governed everything. Grace Yunn met Hannah at the fire tower, climbed all 60 feet of it at 73 years old in courthouse shoes, refusing my arm with a look, and took 4 hours of testimony with the lake glittering below, and her assessment, delivered on the drive down, was the clearing of the sky. Your daughter, Mr. Corbin, has committed no crime I can identify. Vanishing is not illegal. She filed nothing, claimed nothing, signed nothing, misled no officer. Her silence let others assume, and assumption is not her felony. Her exposures are 2. The county spent real money searching that lake, and we will address it. She wants to address it before anyone asks. Restitution offered is character established. And the marriage itself, the coercion, the files wearing her name that we address by making sure that when she reappears, the first complete story anyone hears is ours, documented, corroborated, and standing next to a state of Ohio enforcement order, because, and here Grace looked at me over her glasses in a way that told me she and Fran had been friends for 50 years. The whole game now, Mr. Corbin, is the frame. Your trade and mine turn out to be the same trade. We decide where everyone is standing when the shutter falls, the petition and the clock. Vaughn's court date for the declaration of death sat 8 weeks out when the archive broke, and the insurance stood behind it like a freight car behind an engine, and our whole strategy toward both was Fran's favorite kind, do nothing, visibly. No challenge, no lawyer surfacing, no flicker of doubt from the grieving father, because any resistance would tell the man something in the world had changed, and the man was a professional reader of changes in the world. So I grieved on, publicly, correctly. I stood at the grave mournings. I let Vaughn bring his folders, sat through his gentle timelines, initialed where initialing was harmless, and I want to confess the hardest afternoon of the entire affair. Harder than the darkroom, harder than the tower stairs. The afternoon he brought the listing paperwork for the cottage, to get ahead of the market miles, and I sat at my own kitchen table and watched the man price my wife's mother's house, the beadboard, the green door, the 4-paned window whose light I had verified my living daughter by 11 days earlier, and I said, sounding old and agreeable, whatever you think is best, son, While under the table, my hand memorized the grain of the wood to stay quiet. 66 years old, and the finest performance of my life was given to an audience of one across a plate of store cookies. He left satisfied. I stood in the shower until the water went cold. Some frames, friends, you hold because the picture needs you in it. It does not mean the holding is free. And the town. This is the front nobody plans for and every small town story turns on. Because a resurrection in a place like Larkin Falls cannot be a private legal event. It will be within an hour, the only thing 9,000 people have ever talked about. And Fran, who understood towns the way I understand light, insisted the reveal happen not in a courthouse or a lawyer's office but in front of the town itself. Witnessed, unanimous, unspinnable. He built his blind out of their trust, she said, tapping the timeline, so he comes apart in front of the trust. Where he can't reframe it afterward, because 400 people will have seen the original exposure with their own eyes. And the calendar, as it happened, had already given us the stage, because Vaughn Ellison, image manager to the last, had scheduled 2 weeks before his court date, with the pastor and the florist and a notice in my own newspaper, the formal unveiling of Hannah's headstone. A stone setting, families do it, months after, when the ground has settled, a smaller gathering, a few words, the cloth lifted from the granite. He had built the grave for me, remember. Now he was dressing its stone for the judge. A widower photographed at an unveiling 14 days before a petition is a widower no court keeps waiting. And Fran read the notice in her own paper and called me and said one word, gravel and honey, and the word was there. I asked Vaughn myself at his next folder visit, humble, shaky, whether I might say a few words at the unveiling and show one photograph. You know me. I said, I don't have words, I have pictures. I'd like to show one of her. And the man looked at me with what I will swear was real warmth. Because the awful truth of these stories, learn it here again, is that the counterfeit is also always partly genuine. That is what makes it legal tender. And he said, Miles, she would love. Bring your easel. The last 10 days ran like a closing week. Grace briefed the sheriff's detective, Lena Hartwell, quietly, completely off the record until it wasn't. And Detective Hartwell, who had worked the lake search herself and taken its failure personally, listened to the whole architecture. The order from Ohio, the 2009 frame, the client files Hannah had copied, the coercion timeline, and at the end said the thing that told me the county was in good hands. She said, so on Saturday I'm going to attend a stone unveiling as a private citizen paying respects, and if events should transpire, I'll be standing where events can see me. Restitution for the search was calculated and banked in Grace's trust account, ready to tender the hour Hannah surfaced. Fran built the Courier's edition in secret. The whole story, my photographs, the enforcement order, sidebars on coercive control and on elder investment fraud with hotline numbers, held ready at the printer under a name from the last century, the Candle edition. And I asked her once where the name came from. And my editor looked at me over the glasses and said, before your time, Corbin, before mine nearly, when a paper had a story too hot to typeset in daylight. The night crew set it after hours by candle, they used to say, so the building's own windows wouldn't testify. And every real newsroom keeps one candle in the drawer its whole life, and most never light it. And I have been saving this one since 1962. And then she went back to her blue pencil, 81 years old, laying out the biggest story of her life for a print run she would not confirm even to me. And if you want to know what a free press is, friends, it is not a building and it is not a slogan. It is one old woman with a candle in a drawer, waiting 60 years for the night it protects somebody. And Thursday's lens on Larkin, my final message on the family frequency, ran a photograph from binder 1986A. Nora on the cottage dock laughing, 29 years old, hand shading her eyes, looking up at the camera at the ridge at the future. And the caption said, for 9,000 readers, something about summer. And the caption said, for one reader, in the language of vantage points, Saturday. We look up. Saturday came up cloudless, one of those October mornings when the light in this county goes to amber and every photographer forgives every February. The unveiling was called for 10. By quarter till, the row was ringed 3 deep, because a town grieves in shifts and this was the last shift. The pastor, the rotary, the library board entire, the robotics team in their blue shirts, Main Street merchants who had closed their stores, Fran DeLuca in her funeral coat with, I noticed, a photographer from the paper she had absolutely not cleared with me, Detective Hartwell at the back edge, a private citizen, paying respects, standing precisely where events could see, and Vaughn at the head of the stone, navy jacket, black cloth over the granite, receiving the town's hands and murmurs like a man accepting delivery of something he had ordered months before, which, friends, is exactly what he was doing. The pastor said what pastors say and said it kindly. The cloth came off the stone, and I made myself read it once, Hannah Corbin Ellison, and the dates, the second of which was a lie with a chisel's authority. And then it was time, and Vaughn touched my shoulder, warm, and said to the crowd, Hannah's father would like to share a photograph. And there again, the awful, genuine, grief-adjacent thing in his voice. The man had ordered the whole morning, and some cell of him was mourning at it too. They are not simple, these men. It is why they work. I set up the easel. I have set up 10,000 easels and tripods on that cemetery's grass, for veterans' days and centennials. My hands knew the work and left me free to look at the town. All those faces I had photographed at their weddings and floods, waiting kindly for an old man's picture of his daughter. The board on the easel wore its own black cloth, Fran's touch. Ceremony answers ceremony, she said. And I stood beside it, and I did not have words. I told you I have never had words, so I said only this. Most of you have been in my newspaper. Some of you have been in it 3 generations deep, so you know how I talk. I talk in pictures, and I brought one, and it's the most important photograph anyone in my family has ever taken, and I need you to really look at it. It was taken right here, at Hannah's funeral, at 17 minutes past 10 in the morning. And I lifted the cloth. 400 people looked at a large, luminous, darkroom perfect print of the grave they were standing at, the flowers fresh, the crowd of themselves at its edges, my own bowed gray head at the foot of the plot, all of it seen from above, from a height, from an angle. And you could feel the crowd's mind work it like a hillside feeling weather, the murmur, the tilting heads, the first heads turning north, doing the geometry with their bodies, looking for the height, finding the rise, the chapel. The black oak, and I gave it the beat it needed, one photographer's beat, and then I said into 400 held breaths, the sentence Fran and I had cut to 11 words at her kitchen table, because 11 is a number this channel respects. The photographer would like to be credited. She's here this morning, and on the rise, on the north side, under the black oak at the watching place, my daughter stood up. She stood up out of the long grass where she had waited since before dawn in her mother's blue coat, her mother's ring catching the amber light exactly as composed, because nothing in my family's frames is accident. And she came down the rise slowly, through the graves, through her town, through a silence I have no lens for, 400 people parting the way water parts, hands over mouths, the pastor's book sliding out of his fingers into the grass, old Mrs. Ferretti from the library board saying her name once, Hannah, like a struck bell, and my daughter walked the whole gauntlet of the risen morning looking at exactly one person, and it was not me. I had wondered, planning it, what Dean Vainick would do in the moment, and I had guessed wrong, and so had Fran. We had guessed flight or fury. What the man did instead was worse and taught me more. He recalibrated. You could watch it, frame by frame. I did watch it. The courier photographer Fran smuggled in caught the whole sequence, and those frames have since been studied by people whose job that is. Half a second of pure system failure, the face with nothing on it at all. Then the reach for the room, arms opening. Voice finding the register, Hannah. Oh my God, Hannah, the miracle pivot. The widower resurrecting into overjoyed husband between one heartbeat and the next. And it was flawless, friends, and it was too fast. And 400 people who had each individually spent months being managed by that exact warmth watched it deploy at a graveside in under a second and felt, collectively, town-wide, the temperature drop. He took one step. And my daughter stopped, 10 feet short of him, in front of her own headstone, in front of her whole town, and she did not raise her voice, an archivist to the end. She simply said clearly into the amber morning, the words she and Grace had built, and she had earned the right to deliver, don't. Detective Hartwell, my husband's name is Dean Vanek. He was barred in Ohio in 2011 for stealing from his elderly clients. He has been doing the same thing here for 12 years to people standing in this crowd, and the proof is already in your inbox, and I am alive, and I am done being quiet. Detective Hartwell crossed the grass, a private citizen no longer. Vaughn Ellison looked around him once, at the town, at the blind he had built brush by brush for 12 years. Every face in it turned and closed. And then when he asked the detective, calm to the last, if this was really the venue, I could see we were all confused. It was my daughter's grandmother's oldest friend, 90-year-old Ruth Ferretti of the library board, 4'11" of Larkin Falls, who answered before the law could, striking her cane once on the ground and saying, in a voice that taught Sunday school through 5 presidents, young man, the venue is fine. You picked it. The Courier's Candle edition hit 9,000 doorsteps Monday morning, and I am told single copies traded that week like commodities. Fran ran it the way Fran runs things, complete, sourced, merciless, and humane in the exact right places. The front page a photograph I did not take, the one her smuggled shooter caught, my daughter coming down the rise through the parted crowd, and the headline, which Fran composed at her kitchen table at 2 in the morning and defended against all comers, said simply, she was at the watching place, which meant nothing to the wire services that picked it up and everything to the town it was written for. And that, Fran said, is the whole craft, Corbin. A front page is just a caption with a bigger font. You write it for the people in the frame. Inside ran the enforcement order, the 2009 photograph with the lanyard enlargement inset, a careful, lawyered account of the coercion and the flight, sidebars with the hotline numbers, and, on the lens on Larkin half-page at Fran's insistence, one more archive frame, Nora at the library desk in 1984 holding the Stieglitz book toward the camera, over a single line of caption. She taught them both to read. 81 years old, that woman, and she buried the lead on purpose in the photo credit where my family keeps its important things, and I called her Monday noon and could not speak, and Fran listened to me not speak for a while and then said, gravel and honey, yeah, me too. Thursday's feature is late, by the way, and hung up. Editors, friends, get yourself one. The legal season ran through the winter, and I will give you the docket plainly because these stories owe their ending. Dean Vanek was charged federally and by the state. The client fraud here, wire counts, and the old Ohio matter woke up hungry. Its unpaid restitution attaching like a lien on his whole existence. And his lawyers, facing Hannah's copied files, the custodian records they unlocked, the enforcement history, and a town's worth of witnesses who now read their quarterly statements like scripture, negotiated the only thing left to negotiate, which was arithmetic. He is serving his sentence in a federal facility. The number of years is public record, and I will not give it the dignity of repetition here. And the receiver appointed over his practice has, at last accounting, recovered enough to return a substantial portion to the retirees of Main Street, the teachers, the Rotarians, the trusting, cautious old men, some of whom stood in my kitchen that winter with casseroles reversed, bringing them now. and more than one of whom said some version of the sentence that I want every proud man watching to hear, because it is the antidote to the shame that keeps these frauds alive. Ed down at the hardware, 78 years old, 40 years of statements in a shoebox, stood on my porch and said, "I keep thinking I should have seen it, Miles," and I said, "Ed, I photographed the man for 12 years with a professional instrument and printed him trustworthy every time. We were not fools. We were framed, the whole town, by a professional framer. The shame belongs in exactly one cell, and it's occupied. Say it to each other, friends, whatever your town's version is. The victim's holding the shame is the last theft, and it is the only one you can refuse retroactively. The insurance was never paid. The petition died unheard, withdrawn by counsel the Monday after the unveiling with a one-page filing Grace framed for her office wall. The search and rescue restitution was tendered the same week, and the county, in the person of a board that contained two of Nora's old library volunteers, voted to accept half and directed the remainder to the Swiftwater Rescue Fund. And Hannah wrote the check herself in person and shook every hand in the room. The district attorney reviewed my daughter's whole file and declined all charges in a short public statement whose operative sentence, Grace tells me, will be quoted in coercive control trainings for years. The law does not punish a drowning person for reaching the far shore. The marriage was ended, the filing citing what the statutes permit them to cite, and my daughter petitioned the same season to restore her name, and there was a small ceremony, none of the papers covered, in Grace's office, where Hannah Corbin signed herself back into existence, and used, to do it, the fountain pen from the returns desk of the Larkin Falls Library, which Fran, who apparently keeps everything too, produced from her handbag at the correct moment like the editor of The Whole. And the cottage. The listing died with everything else, and we spent the spring out there, my daughter and I, doing the work the liability had allegedly needed, which turned out to be one soft porch board and a family's worth of ghosts, and we painted the green door the same green, 3 coats, and rehung the 4-paned window shutters. And on the first warm Saturday, Hannah walked down to the dock her father has repaired past all deed and title, and stood where her mother laughed in binder 19A, and looked up at the ridge, at the fire tower glinting 60 feet above the birches, and raised one hand to it, the way you greet a colleague. The lake sat there shining, unbothered, keeping what it keeps. We have made our peace with Pine Hollow, she and I. It never lied to anyone. It was simply deep enough to hold a story for a while, which, as it happens, is also the job description of a father. The headstone came up in April. There is no protocol for it. The monument man told us, standing in the row with his straps and his flatbed. 60 years in the trade, and I have set 10,000 and lifted exactly none. And we all stood quietly while the granite with the lying date swung up into the amber light. And it was Hannah who decided its afterlife, because of course it was. The stone went to the library, recut, the dates ground away, the surface polished new, and it stands now in the children's reading garden that the town built with a piece of the recovered funds, bearing only a line my daughter chose from her mother's whole shelf-coded life, low to the ground where the small ones can trace the letters. And the line says, "Everything is always in there, keep looking, and no child who reads it will ever know its provenance." And both of the women it descends from would agree that this is exactly correct. Now the private season, the one the candle edition could not cover, because a resurrection, it turns out, is also a wound, and the wound is shaped exactly like the question I promised at the start I would answer. Why did she let me grieve? 9 days at a grave, friends. 9 mornings of watering sod over an urn of keepsakes while my living child watched the photograph of it and decided. We had to walk all the way into that question, she and I, that winter, some of it across a good therapist's carpet, and I am going to report what we found there, because There are fathers watching who will someday hold their own version of those 9 days, and they deserve the map. Her answer, when it finally came whole, came in her trade's language, as mine come in mine. "Dad," she said, "I sealed the record to protect the researcher." Archivists do it every day. There are files you close for 50 years, not because the researcher is weak, but because the file is dangerous while certain people are alive and certain claims are open. And you were the researcher I loved most. And every day the file stayed sealed was a day he had no reason to look at you. I know what the 9 days cost you. I watched them cost you in that photograph every morning, your coat, your bowed head. And on the 9th morning the cost got heavier than the danger, and I broke my own seal, and I have asked myself ever since whether that was love or weakness. And the therapist made me stop calling it weakness, so I'll say it her way. It was the day the archivist remembered she was also a daughter. And I told her my side of the ledger, which the fathers here should hear, that the 9 days, in the final accounting, I do not grieve. I keep them the way you keep a scar that proves the surgery, because they were the price of her exit working, and I would pay them again at double. And the only mournings I truly cannot carry are the hypothetical ones, the years of them, in the world where she calculated 1 degree differently and never sent the photograph at all, and stayed dead to me forever out of protection. And that world was one archivist's heartbeat away, friends, one heartbeat. And when I need to be kind to a stranger quickly, I remember that, and it works every time. I owe the comments section its payoffs, and I keep my books. The guess first from the beginning, who took the photograph and why no words. Most of you, I suspect, had her alive by the 2nd act. This channel trains its regulars well. But the wager I made with myself was about the why, and here is the answer laid out plain, because it is the future arriving and your family needs it. She sent a photograph and not words, because words can no longer prove anything. Hear it, in this age, from a man who spent his life in evidence. A voice on a phone can be manufactured from a minute of tape. A text is letters anyone's thumbs can type. A video call, they are getting there faster than you want to know. Every channel you trust to recognize your own child is now forgeable except one, and that one is shared memory anchored to physical place, the private geography no database holds. The watching place could not be faked because it could not be known, and that is why my daughter, fleeing with her life in a dry bag, chose as her proof of life not a sentence but a vantage point. So here is the practical sermon, the one I give at the library now on second Tuesdays, and I want you to do it this week, not someday, this week at your table. Every family needs a watching place. A code, agreed in person, never written, never spoken on a phone. Pick a question with an answer no stranger and no software could harvest, not a pet's name, friends. Pets are on the internet, something smaller and stranger. The thing Dad burned in 1994, what Grandma called the good sisters, and agree out loud once that any call, any voice, any message claiming to be family in trouble gets the question. And family answers easy, and everything else hangs up. It costs one dinner conversation. The scam it defeats is already dialing. And if you build one this week, put the word oak in the comments, just oak, so the next reader scrolling in the dark can count the groves going in. And the vote, sheriff or alone, and my accounting with Fran, which I promised. You voted whenever I tell it about even, and Fran's case for the sheriff has never softened. You risked her twice, Corbin, once on your legs and once on your cloak and dagger. Hartwell is good police. Good police can keep a secret. And my case has never softened either. That I could not know Hartwell was good police until I knew what Vanek was. And finding out what Vanek was required the one archive no warrant can search. And the archive only talks to me. We argued it across her kitchen table again last month. 40 years of arguing between us and this one now in the permanent rotation. And I will give you where we actually landed. because it is truer than either verdict. Fran set down her pencil and said, "The honest answer, Corbin, is that you got the right ending by the path that happened to fit the two of you, her seals and your darkrooms, and another family with other trades should walk another path. And the only universal in it is the one we put in the sidebar, which is, tell one person. Her father, a friend, a hotline, an editor, one. The silence is his architecture. One voice outside it and the architecture has a crack." "Print that," she said, and picked the pencil back up. "So I am printing it." Hannah runs the county archive again. They reinstated the funding line inside a month of the candle edition, towns being what they are. And she has begun on her own terms with her own hands the project a certain man once proposed with an inventory smile, the digitization of the Corbin negatives, all 200,000. And she works evenings in my basement under the red light, cataloging her father's 40 years frame by frame, and sometimes she calls up the stairs. "Who is this in 1987 with the enormous fish?" And I come down, and I remember because the photographer remembers everyone, and she types it in, and the county's attic gets one more label. And if you had told me 2 years ago that the happiest sound in my house would be my daughter's voice asking me about a fish, I would have wept then instead of now. Before the lessons, I owe one more debt, and it is to a particular set of you, the ones I asked at the beginning to stay to the end, the ones for whom the middle chapters of this story were not suspenseful, because they were familiar. The cropped ones. The people living, right now, inside a frame somebody else composes, whose geography has been shrinking so gradually it looks like your own preference, whose phone has a second audience, whose thoughts arrive pre-approved, and who have run my daughter's arithmetic at your own kitchen table and gotten her answer, that everyone you tell becomes someone he or she can aim at, and that the exits are all wired. I want to say 3 things to you directly, an old man to your face, and I have cleared all 3 with the people at the hotline whose number is going to sit on this screen, so you may trust the engineering first. My daughter's exit worked, and it was still the wrong exit, and she will tell you so herself. It cost a lake search, a grave, 9 days of her father's grief, and a year of legal peril that broke our way only because of a photograph, an archive, and luck stacked on. She did not choose the lake because it was good. She chose it because she could not see the doors, and the doors were there. They are always more numerous than the arithmetic of isolation lets you count. Advocates who do this daily, safety planners who know the wiring, legal shields her lawyer could have raised that she never learned existed, because the whole design of a controlling marriage is to be your only source of information about your own options. You are reading a map drawn by your captor. Borrow someone else's map. That is all a hotline is, friends, someone else's map, and the call does not commit you to one single step. It only replaces his cartography with the truth. Second, the sentence for the rest of us, the fathers, the mothers, the sisters, the neighbors watching someone we love get cropped. You cannot pull a person out of a frame. Pulling is what the frame is built to withstand. Every rescue attempt gets processed into more evidence that the outside world is against the marriage. What you can do, what works, is what I now understand I was doing all along without knowing it, in the columns, in the photo credits, in the language of Oaks. You keep a channel open that costs them nothing and proves nothing to their watcher. You say, and you say it once calmly, without a case attached, I want you to hear one sentence and keep it. There is nothing you could ever tell me and nothing anyone could ever show me about you that would make my door close. Nothing. That's all. No follow-up, no campaign. And then you stay boring and present and unoffended by the distance, for as long as it takes, because you are not trying to win an argument, you are maintaining a lighthouse, and a lighthouse does not chase ships. It just refuses, on any night, in any weather, to be off. My door was Hannah's lighthouse. She told the therapist, the one fixed light in his whole cropped seascape, and the photograph from the watching place when you develop it all the way down, was simply my daughter in the dark at last, steering by it. And third, to the ones who did the leaving already by whatever door you found, and carry the shame of the door's shape, the account you emptied, the lie you told, the years you let someone grieve. The district attorney of this county put it better than I can, and I will leave it with you as the finding of this entire story. The law does not punish a drowning person for reaching the far shore. Neither does this channel. Neither does any father worth the word. Reach. Now the lessons proper, the short course, because every story here ends at the same workbench and the tools deserve their labels. 1. Build the watching place. The code, the question, the private geography, agreed in person this week. In the age of manufactured voices, shared memory anchored to physical place is the last unforgeable signature, and it is free, and it takes one dinner. 2. Keep the archive. Film, paper, negatives, ledgers, the boring, complete record of your ordinary life, because the counterfeit man's entire craft is controlling which frames survive, and the archive is the frame he cannot recall. 40 years of negatives in a basement looked like a museum of things nobody asked to keep, until the morning the museum was asked and answered, and a lanyard from 2009, 0.04 of a second of unregarded light, outweighed 12 years of performance. Your version may be a shoebox of statements or a diary of Tuesdays. Keep it anyway. Storage is cheap. Testimony is priceless. 3. Read the light, not the subject, in photographs and in people. The subject arranges itself for you, the light cannot, and the tells are always in the margins, the too perfect 12 years, the recalibration half-second, the warmth that deploys. When someone's every frame composes, someone is performing surveillance on your camera. Look where the picture is boring, the corners, the reflections, the grain, because everything is always in there. And the ones counting on you never enlarging the corner are, every single time, the ones living in it. And 4, the one over the library door now, in a 9-year-old's logic and a stonecutter's letters. When the thing in front of you is too big to stand at, do not conclude you are weak, and do not let anyone else conclude it for you. Find the rise. Find the oak. Watching from where it doesn't swallow you is not retreat, friends. It is composition. It is the whole art. My wife knew it at a returns desk. My daughter knew it at 9. And it took me 66 years and the worst season of my life to learn what they always knew, that love does not require you to stand where it swallows you. It only requires that you keep looking. Everything is always in there. Keep looking. Let me close where these stories close, in the ordinary light after, because you have stood with me through the dark and the developing, and you have earned the print. It is a year and a half now since the unveiling. The grave in the north row is Nora's alone again, the way the row was always meant to read, and I still go Sunday mornings, but the visit has changed its grammar. I go to report now, not to mourn, and the reports are good. I tell her the archive numbers. We are past. I tell her the library garden gets read to on Thursdays, small ones tracing her sentence with their fingers. I tell her Fran is well, still editing me weekly at 82, still arguing our argument, still right about everything except the one thing. And some Sundays, not every Sunday when I finish, I glance north to the rise, to the black oak, out of 25 years of habit. And every so often, not every time, but enough, my daughter is up there in her mother's blue coat, come out on her own Sunday errand, and she raises one hand and I raise one back, and no one in that whole cemetery sees two people talking, and that friends, that small crackle on the family frequency, the channel restored, the watching play, is the entire fortune this story leaves me, and I would not trade it for any archive on earth. Hannah photographs now. It started as cataloging and became the thing itself. My old camera bag went up the cottage stairs one weekend and never came back down. And she shoots the county the way I did. The fairs, the floods, the ribbon cuttings, furniture with a lens, seeing everything, keeping everything, and the courier runs her work beside my Thursday half-page. And Fran, who has now edited 3 generations of this family if you count Nora's library newsletters, and Fran counts them, says she is better than I was at the same age, and says it to my face, at my table, eating my pie, and is correct. Last month my daughter's first feature ran her own half-page, her mother's eye and her father's grain, and the subject she chose for it, of course, was Pine Hollow at first light, shot from the fire tower, the whole lake laid out silver and blameless from the one vantage where you can see everything and cannot be seen, and her caption, 6-point italic in the margin, where this family keeps its important things, read from the New Corbin Archive, Frame 1. Some mornings the far shore is just the near shore, seen from high enough. Prints and inquiries welcome. If this story reached you, tell me in the comments. Go back to your first guess and your vote, sheriff or alone, and grade yourself honestly. And if the word frames found you earlier tonight in a way you were not expecting, then let the word oak find you next week, at your own table, building your family's watching place. And tell me when it is built, because I read every comment, and every oak in that comment section is a light going on in a window somewhere. And I have come to believe the windows can see each other. If someone you love is being cropped, say the lighthouse sentence to them this week, once calmly, and then be boring and present and unoffended for as long as it takes. And if you want more stories like this one, please subscribe so you do not miss what I have to share next. Thank you for staying with me until the end, all the way down into the grain. Trust the people you love. Build the code before you need it. Keep the archive nobody asks you to keep. And if the day ever comes when your phone lights up with a photograph that cannot possibly exist, do not decide what it is in the first minute, and do not let your fear decide either. Take it into the dark. Go down into the corners of it, 16 times up, 20 times up, as deep as the grain goes. Because everything is always in there, friends. The truth, the signature, the ring catching the light, the daughter, alive, standing exactly where love taught her to stand. Everything is always in there. Keep looking.